Have you ever been wronged by someone just because they didn't like you? Or maybe they didn't like the devotion that you had toward your God. How did you respond? Did you put aside your trust in God just to please man? Or did you have faith in times of trouble?
Sunday, this the place to be. I know the perfect school just for you and me. Fill you with the word, it'll set you free. So grab a seat, it's Sunday school with the Deek. With the Deek, he's got a word for you and me. With the Deek, with the Deek, he's got a word for you and me.
Welcome to another edition of Sunday School with the Deek. I'm Deacon Wallace Hill IV, proud member of the Mount Pisgah Missionary Baptist Church, where my father, Wallace Hill III, is the pastor. Now, it's an honor for me to have you take time out of your busy week to join me for the Sunday School lessons based on the International Lesson Series. For those of you that are new, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button at the bottom of the page. Then click that little bell right next to it, and each week you'll be notified. The Deek has uploaded another lesson. The goal of Sunday School with the Deek is to bring the Word of God to life in your life and to give you an understanding of the Scriptures and make the Word of God real and interesting and an integral part of your day-to-day being, and have a little bit of fun while we do it. Ultimately, it's my goal and my hope that these lessons will inspire those who don't have a relationship with Christ to come asking, what must I do to be saved? Now, we're in our third week of our third and final quarter, third and final unit of the quarter. And this whole quarter is about faith. But this particular unit is about how the righteous live by faith. Last week we talked about how God rescued the 3 Hebrew boys out of the fiery furnace. It was a wonderful lesson of having faith in God and putting that faith into action. Their faith was so strong that they were willing to deal with whatever came their way, whatever their fate was. And they told the king that even if God didn't rescue them, that they knew that he could do it if he wanted to. So, we'll all, including me, be so much better if we can get to the point where these Hebrew boys were and in our walk with God. So I failed to mention last week that Daniel, even though we're in the book of Daniel, Daniel was no part of that lesson last week. It was his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were part of that. I didn't even look to do the study about where Daniel was at the time, but this week we have the exact opposite. We have Daniel in a situation, and his friends are nowhere to be found. So let's get into the background of the lesson. I'm not going to go over the background that I went over last week about Daniel and his 3 friends. This week we're in chapter 6. After last week's lesson in chapter 3, where the Hebrew boys, weren't harmed by that fire, 23 years pass, and King Nebuchadnezzar has a vision of a tree being driven away from the people. And then Daniel interprets that dream and states that the King Nebuchadnezzar was that tree, and he was being driven away from his kingdom. And these events happened, or they did come true. And for like 7 months, King Nebuchadnezzar is in the wilderness, and then he loses his sanity. And after 7 months, his sanity is restored, and he praises God, and the cycle goes on and on. So 6 years after that, Nebuchadnezzar dies, and he's replaced by King Nabonidus. There you go. King Nabonidus. And then 3 years later, King Nabonidus appoints Belshazzar to run Babylon. Now remember, Israel is in captivity. They're in under Babylonian rule. So after Nebuchadnezzar dies, Nabonidus takes over. And then after 3 years, King Nabonidus puts his son Belshazzar in charge to run Babylon. Now, in chapter 5, Belshazzar holds a great feast and uses the holy vessels taken from Jerusalem when they took them captive. And they made those vessels part of the feast. And then while all this was going on, there was handwriting appears on the wall. And Belshazzar calls for Daniel. He said, Daniel, what does all of this mean? And Daniel interprets it as a judgment from God. And then, so from there, Belshazzar gets killed when Cyrus of Persia invades Babylon. Now, Cyrus of Persia takes over. Now, so Persia is now taking over Babylon, and Babylon had taken over Jerusalem. So now Persia is in control, and Cyrus is the king. So Cyrus is the ruler over everything now. And chapter 6 opens up with a man by the name of Darius running the place. And so there's no history of a ruler named Darius, in this particular period that's recorded in chapter 6 of Daniel. But after spending way too long studying the history books about who was king and all of this, I spent hours. I'm of the opinion that Darius was an ancient official known as Gubaru. And you can find him in those ancient documents. And Cyrus appointed Gubaru over Babylon immediately after they took over. And so these ancient documents show that the man Gubaru had the power to make appointments, to assemble an army, to levy taxes, and to possess palaces. Gubaru was in a very real sense, he was basically the king. So let's just call it what it is. He was basically the king, and he's otherwise known as Darius. So here, we're in 539 BC, and chapter 6 opens. So our lesson has 11 verses, and they're all over the place. So I'm going to try to read even the ones that are not in our lesson just to keep the flow and the continuity. So let's go ahead and get into our lesson for today. But before I do, let me say this. Today's date is February 18th, 2024. Our lesson text is Daniel chapter 6, verses 10, 11, 14, 16, 19 through 23, 26, and 27. Our lesson title is Faith in Times of Trouble. Grab your Bible, grab your books, grab your pen, grab your paper, and let's get into today's lesson. Verse 1. Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise these high officers and protect the king's interests. Verse 3. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Then this is where the hate comes in. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs. But they could not find anything to criticize or condemn him. He was faithful and always responsible and completely trustworthy. So now that they couldn't find nothing how he was conducting his business, verse 5 says, so they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. Let's get him on his religion. So the administrators and high officers went to King Darius, and said, long live King Darius. This was a mighty show of respect. Verse 7 says, we are all in agreement, all of us administrators and officials and high officers and advisors and governors that the king, you know what? The king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. And so, Darius, all high and mighty, he's like, wow, yeah, maybe I should do that. For 30 days, anybody that prays got to pray to me. I'm the man. See, they know how to get people when it comes to power. Anyway, verse 8 says, and now, your majesty, why don't you issue and sign this law so it cannot be changed? An official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. Verse 9, so King Darius signed the law. So they tricked Darius into coming up with this law that can't nobody praise or pray to nobody but the king for 30 days. And they making it sound like it's all about Darius, but really they trying to get your boy Daniel. So let's get into the lesson. Verse 10. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open, in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. So I want you to notice something here about Daniel. The verse said when he knew the writing was signed. Not when he was wondering if it was going to get signed. It says he already knew that it had been signed. He didn't try to run, y'all. He didn't hide. He did what he does, what he always does. The verse says, as usual. So how many of us have a structured prayer life? And I honestly think a lot of you do. I'm not disciplined like that yet. I think a lot of people who watch the Deek faithfully, I think you guys probably have a very structured prayer life. But I'm still trying to get there. So, I live such an unstructured life that, I'm literally barely on time or always late to everything I do. And I'm just keeping it real, y'all. I'm just keeping it real. So, I'm busting my butt in the morning, which is when I want to reserve my prayer time. But, after reading this lesson about Daniel, I'm trying to get more motivated to do better as far as structuring my prayer time. So now don't get me wrong. I pray every day, but I want it to be more structured is what I'm saying. So back to the lesson. So Daniel found out that they made up this law specifically to get him. And he still went to do the very thing that they made this law against. So I'm trying to, and I just told you a minute ago, I'm trying to get to a structure where I can pray once a day. But it says here Daniel has 3 times a day that he prays. He kneeled, he prayed, and he gave thanks, just as he always did. Now, Daniel ain't changing nothing based on his circumstances. You know what I'm saying? Daniel ain't praying more now because he about to get in trouble. You know how we do. We pick up the prayer pace when bad stuff is going on, or we turn up the serious meter a few notches. So, and then we lower it when everything is going good. But not Daniel. He said he did as usual. He prayed every day at the same time. Verse 11. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. So, do any of you have your life so structured that people can set their clock to you? I know some people who do the same thing at the same time every day. And those same people will be all messed up if anything gets thrown off that routine. I had a boss. My old boss was that way. He walked in the door at the same time every day. At least that's what they tell me. Because your boy wasn't there. He ate a banana at the same time every day. He heated up his soup at the same time every day. And he left at the same time every day. At least that's what they tell me. But look, if a robber is trying to get the deacon, he gonna be all thrown off because no day is alike for me. But these guys, that's getting back to the lesson. These guys knew they could find Daniel praying at the same time every day because he did it every day at the same time in a window where everybody could see. So he loved his God and he was not ashamed of his God. It says he was in the window praying every day. So they went to his house just as they figured he was standing right there, or kneeling right there praying. Now, they're going there to see if he's breaking the law. So there's 12 and 13 are not in our lesson, but I'll read them. Verse 12 says, so they went straight to the king after they saw him praying and reminded him about his law. Did you not sign a law that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions? Yes, the king replied. That decision stands. It's an official law of the Medes and the Persians that cannot be revoked. Verse 13 says, then they told the king, that man Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, one of those Jews, is ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day. Now our lesson picks back up in verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. So this verse reveals a lot about Darius. It opens up and says that he was very sore displeased with himself. Not with Daniel. He was displeased with himself. And why would that verse say that? Why would this verse say that? He's mad because he's realizing now that he's been tricked by these princes and officials that came and asked him for this decree, to be made into law. Now Darius loved and trusted Daniel, which was evident in the fact that he made Daniel the number one person over all the empire. So all these other princes in these 120 provinces reported to Daniel. And Darius knew that Daniel would always make decisions that he would approve of. So now here we are. Darius realizes that, what has happened, that he's been, and he's being bothered by this for 2 reasons. One being that he wishes Daniel had just been a little bit more careful and did his praying more privately. He's like, why did you do that, Daniel? Could you just, for 30 days, just kind of stay out the way, still pray to your God, but just don't do it in the window. You know what I'm saying? That's probably kind of what he was thinking a little bit. But he also mad at himself for allowing these princes to trick him. Because he can't go back on anything now, even though he's the king. Because back in those days, when a law was signed and sealed by the king, it could not be overturned, even by the king. There was a verse in Esther, chapter 8, verse 8, when something like this happened. And it goes like this. Now, go ahead and send a message to the Jews in the king's name, telling them that whatever you want, and seal it with the king's signet ring. But remember that whatever has already been written into the king's name and sealed with his signet ring can never be revoked. So now that he can't overturn his law, the verse says that he set his heart on trying to figure out how to get Daniel out this mess. These events mostly likely happened in the morning or early afternoon because the verse says he labored all day until the going down of the sun, trying to figure out how to help Daniel. And so back in those days, those punishments had to be taken out the same day. So, this kind of reminds me of Pontius Pilate, who was in the same position when the Jews were trying to kill Jesus. Remember that? Pilate knew Jesus was an innocent man, and he labored all day with the decision on what to do with him. He was sending them from judgment hall to judgment hall, and trying to say, hey, I could give you Barabbas or I could give you Jesus. And he was just trying to come with all kinds of reasons not to have to kill Jesus. It's hard to punish somebody that you don't feel deserves it, especially when the punishment is going to be death. So I'll read verses 15. Verse 15, even though it's not in the lesson, verse 15 says, in the evening, the men went together to the king and said, Your Majesty, you know that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no law that the king signs can be changed. And I kind of just told you that from that verse in Esther. No, let's go to verse 16. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spoke and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. So, Darius didn't have no other choice but to go through with the punishment for Daniel. So he commanded that Daniel be thrown into the lion's den, and as was the punishment for praying to any god other than the King Darius. So I think this verse was probably written out of order, because it says Daniel was cast into the lion's den, and then the king spoke to him. So I think Darius probably spoke to Daniel first, and then he was thrown into the lion's den. But I love the B part of this verse, because it shows you the kind of person that Darius was. He said, he goes to Daniel and says, Thy God who thy servest continually, he will deliver you. So what Darius is basically saying here is, look, Daniel, I done did all I could do. I'm sorry it has to come to this, but now you need to lean on your God who you continually serve. He'll deliver you. And what I love about this verse is a couple of things. I love the fact that Daniel is so devoted to his God that he's known for it. He's so devoted to his God that his reputation is that he's always serving his God. And this is where we should all strive to be. I always try to make a point in these lessons where I can to apply it to our life. Many of us will occasionally show a godly character in how we act or how we treat people. But then it's usually offset by the way we act or the way we treat people. So, we should be consistent in our actions, like Daniel, and continually serve God in our actions and in our speech. So, we should leave no doubt to us being a child of God. I'm talking to every single one of us listening to this today. So back to the lesson. I told you it was two things that I liked about Darius here. The other thing is his confidence that Darius had in Daniel's God. You notice Darius said, the God who you serve will deliver you. Darius didn't serve Daniel's God. He served other gods. But here he's so confident in Daniel's God. And maybe it's because, he heard about the stories of the things that's happened over the years. How over 30 years ago, Daniel's God, saved the 3 Hebrew boys in that fiery furnace. So I don't know what his reasoning was, but he was confident in Daniel's God. So and now I'm getting back to us, you want your actions to give confidence in God to people who don't even know God. And that's why these lessons are here. This lesson is called Faith in Time of Trouble. We need to display this type of faith whatever we're going through. When people see our faith, it kind of rubs off on them. Even if they'll never show that type of faith themselves, we should never doubt the impact that our faith will have on some unbeliever's life. Just you showing your faith. They're watching us, y'all. So now they throw Daniel into the lion's den. Now the den is most likely a pit. This makes sense because those lions would not be able to escape. So, this part is not in the Bible, but when you do the research, you'll see that according to the Apocrypha, there were 7 lions in the den. And they would get fed 2 carcasses and 2 sheep per day. But on this day, they didn't give them anything. So they would be extra hungry, extra greedy for some Daniel stew. Y'all heard of the Daniel's fast? Well, they about to eat Daniel real fast. So, seriously, let's get back to the lesson to see what happens here once he's thrown into the lion's den. Our lesson skips verses 17 and 18, but I'm going to read them. Verse 17, a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed the stone with his own royal seal and the seals of the nobles, so that no one could rescue Daniel. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night fasting. He refused his usual entertainment and couldn't sleep at all that night. This was really hard on King Darius because he knew that Daniel didn't deserve to die. Our lesson picks back up in verse 19. Verse 19 says, then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste unto the den of lions. Verse 20, and when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said unto Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver you from the lions? Did he do it? Did he save you? I hope he saved you. And so now, if Darius didn't have any hope in Daniel's God, he wouldn't even gotten up and came down here that morning to see him, right? He had some hope that Daniel's God would do this. So, if he didn't have any hope, he would have just sat there and felt sorry for him. But Darius got up early in the morning because he had hope in Daniel's God. And he got up and ran to the lion's den to see if Daniel had survived. Now, this reminds me of how on the third day after Jesus died, the women had went to the tomb expecting to embalm Jesus' body. So Darius is running to the lion's den to see what happened with Daniel. So it says Darius cried out with a lamentable voice. And that's a voice that's full of grief, full of sorrow. He was probably doing more howling than speaking. He screams out, Daniel, was your God who you continually to serve, was he able to save you from the lions? Verse 21. Then Daniel said unto the king, O king, live forever. Now, I thought real hard about not expounding on this short little verse, but I saw something powerful in this. God gave me something powerful in this verse. When Darius cried out, Daniel, I am sure he was hoping, but not expecting to hear anything back in return. But Daniel answers him here. And I don't want to concentrate on the fact that Daniel responded. I want to concentrate on what Daniel said. He said, O king, live forever. And I told you earlier, this is the ultimate respect given to the king. Because, Daniel was not holding no grudge against the king. Even though he threw him into the lion's den for doing nothing. He had Daniel thrown into the lion's den. But when Daniel responds, he gives him respect. And I wonder how many of us could do this. Because, instead of wishing Darius ill will, he wished him long life. And his response, gives us a glimpse of how Jesus responded to the man that was nailing them final nails into the cross. In Luke 23 and 34, Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And it's just a powerful statement to say to somebody who is doing you wrong. So, my question is, how do you respond to people who do you wrong? Do you have a lot of love of Christ in you, not to return what they did to you tit for tat? Peter tells us in 1 Peter 2 and 21, for God called you to do good, even if it means suffering. Just as Christ suffered for you, he is your example, and you must follow in his steps. So suffering might be somebody treating you wrong. And it's not, well, I'm going to get them back or forget them, or clapping back at them. So it says, even if it means suffering, that suffering might be you just shutting your mouth and not saying nothing or treating them nice, right? This is why these lessons are here for us, to help us be better Christians. And a lot of us don't want to hear this because we would rather be in that headspace of not dealing with people we don't like or who have wronged us. You know, we find that to be our happy place. But Peter also tells us in 1 Peter 2:23, he did not retaliate when he was insulted. He's talking about Jesus, Peter is. Nor threaten revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. So Peter's telling us, look, it's not our job to get revenge. It's not our job to clap back at people. It's not our charge to get people told. It's our charge to let God handle it. It says, who always judges fairly. Paul even writes to us in Romans 12:17-18. He says, never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you honorably. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. So, y'all thought the Deek wouldn't teach from such a short verse, but God had revealed that to me for some reason. You know, when Darius called out his name, Daniel said, "Oh, live the king." He gave him so much respect, even though Darius was the reason he was in the lion's den. So, I hope it was for someone who needed to hear that. Verse 22. My God has sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths that they've not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. So, now, let's not forget, Daniel did deliberately break the law. Because the verse said he knew the law had been signed. So he ignored the decree. You know, he was no doubt guilty. But what he says here is true. He says he was innocent before God. And so he tells Darius, hey, I've done nothing to harm you either, O king. And why does he say that? Because I think Daniel was trying to say, look, I didn't fight back. I didn't kick. I didn't scream. I didn't try to negotiate my way out of this. You know, I just stood for God, and I was willing to accept whatever happened to me, even if it was death. So Darius did what he had to do. And no one in the kingdom could ever say Darius played favoritism, because he did throw Daniel into the lion den. And so, you know, Daniel says, look, I didn't do you no harm either. But Daniel confirms the miracle here. He tells him God sent an angel and shut the mouths of the lions. Now, the angel mentioned here is not identified, but Hebrews 1:14 tells us that angels are only servants and spirits who care for people who will inherit salvation. They're going to always watch over us. So we don't know how the angel saved him. You know, I don't know if it was the brightness of his presence that scared the lions. Did the angel threaten him? It threatened the lions like the angel threatened that donkey in Numbers 22 and 27, if you remember that story. But whatever happened, it doesn't matter. You know, all we should care about is that the angel of God came and saved Daniel by taming the lions to act against their nature, which would be to eat Daniel. Isaiah tells us this is how it's going to be when Jesus returns. If you look at Isaiah 11:7, he says, the cow will graze with the bear. That ain't natural. The cub and the calf will lie down together. That ain't natural. And the lion will eat like a cow. Eat hay like a cow. So, you know, this could be a foreshadowing of when Jesus comes, when the lion had no want to eat Daniel. He just laid there. I guess he would rather eat some grass than Daniel. But let's go to verse 23. Then was the king exceedingly glad and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no matter of hurt was found on him, because he had believed in his God. It says Darius was exceedingly happy. He was happy that Daniel was still alive after having to punish him because he was tricked into that law. So Darius commanded that they lift Daniel up out of the lion's den, and the Bible tells us there was not a mark on him. No bruise from throwing him into the den, and no hurt put on him by the lions. You know, all of this happened because Daniel trusted his God. He continually served him, which is what got him in trouble, but it also got him saved from the lions. So our lesson skips verses 24 and 25 and then ends with 26 and 27. So verse 24 says, Then the king gave orders to arrest the men who had maliciously accused Daniel. He had them thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and their children. Come on, man. That's some rough stuff. They ain't even, the wives and the children ain't got nothing to do with it. But they got through in there with them. The lions leaped on them and tore them apart before they even hit the floor of the lion's den. They standing up, catching them as they falling down into the pit, eating them before they hit the ground. Oh my goodness. Then, verse 25, Then Darius sent his message to the people of every race and nation and language throughout the world. Peace and prosperity unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. And his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even until the end. So, he put out the decree that everybody got to praise Daniel's God. But he says the God of Daniel. So even though he believes Daniel serves the true and living God, he still won't say that he's the God of Darius. But, sometimes it's just, some people just takes a whole lot. Verse 27 says, He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and earth. And he have delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. And, this is very similar to how things were when Jesus walked the earth. He performed many examples of supernatural powers, right? This was done to prove to people on earth at that time that he was the Son of God. And those with open hearts would see this and look for reasons to believe in him. Signs and wonders, and they were all an important part of establishing Christianity. So just like that, Darius saw what happened, or heard about what happened in the fiery furnace, saw what happened to Daniel, and he's saying, look, they serve a true and living God. Verse 28 ends the chapter. It says, So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So this is the end of our lesson for the week. I tried to shorten it up this week, as a gift to those who fearlessly endured the past couple of weeks with me going 50 minutes at sometimes. So I hope you get something out of this lesson today. I've heard these verses for years, but this is the first time I've actually studied it and taught it. So to God be the glory. As we close, I just want us to understand that many of us could be going through something right now. It could be a situation like Daniel where you did absolutely nothing to find yourself in this situation. It could be that your actions or your decisions have caused you to be where you are. But regardless of how you got there, that you're there, and this might be a time of trouble. These lessons help us to see that if we trust God, he will and can deliver us. But I don't want you to only see that God can do that. I want you to see what Daniel did in this lesson as well. He served God continuously. He prayed and thanked him daily, at the same time every day, 3 times a day. And he had a reputation for serving God. So, let us be known by our love for God and how we live our life. This lesson is just as important as the other lesson, that God can get us, out of anything. He can do anything for us. The lesson of treating people good and having a reputation of serving God is just as important. So here are the lessons for the day. Next week's lesson will be from the book of Habakkuk. Whew, that might be a rough one. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. And the title of the lesson is Faith in God's Purpose. I used to get excited when I'd see we only had a few verses, but you never know when the Holy Spirit is going to lead us, so I'm not saying nothing. So remember to subscribe to this channel, comment, and share. Your comments help me, and sharing the lesson will help someone grow by planting a seed. Let's dismiss. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength, my Redeemer. Amen. Sunday School with the Deek.
Sunday, this the place to be.